Bootstrap Confidential, the podcast where we talk to successful bootstrappers about the playbook for bootstrapping.
Welcome to Bootstrap Confidential, where this episode we're talking to Sam Dybac, a many-time founder in Australia. Most recently, in 2013, Sam successfully founded Bootstrapped and is the CEO and founder of the PR Hub. So very much welcome to the show, Sam, and thanks very much for taking the time to talk to us.
Oh, it's so good to be here. Thanks, Charles, for having me.
Great. So let's just get straight into it. So I always like to start by asking successful founders, what was the moment? What was the genesis? Was it an aha moment where a light bulb went off? Was it something that been planned for years? Was it serendipity as lots of different things came together? So I know you've had a number of businesses, a number of successes, a number of setbacks. So with the PR Hub in 2013, what was the kind of story behind that?
So I was actually coming out of a really bad period in my life. So I'd come out of a not so great business experience, which really challenged me mentally, not just financially. So I probably had about $80,000 worth of credit card debt coming out of that business. It burnt me, like it floored me, and that takes a lot for me. But that particular business experience was just a moment where I went, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to be a founder. I'm financially not in a great place, mentally definitely not in a great place. I just want to strip it all back. I had no idea what I was going to do, Charles, at that stage. Didn't really know anyone, which like connections wise, network wise. I'd been working in sort of the FMCG space in a business that went terribly badly. And so I sort of had this moment where I went, you know what, I'm just going to work for somebody else. I'm just going to do 9 to 5. I had the great fortune of working with the former New South Wales Liberal leader, politician Kerry Chigorowski, in her government relations business. And we had met a few years prior. And so I started working for her. And essentially I was just running the business, helping her with her media engagement, her speaking, very prominent, bipartisan, very well-respected politician, and with a very big profile. And so I just did that for about 6 months. But I think, when you're a founder or an entrepreneur, there's something in you that always wants you to keep going. I see that a lot with a lot of our clients. They exit 8-9-figure businesses and they spend maybe 3-6 months on sabbatical, and then and then they start again. So I just needed some time to refresh. And that was a great opportunity. And so I, sort of was doing some great work with Kerry, and I thought, you know what, I actually really want to work with founders and successful CEOs to help them tell their stories, because they don't know how to do it. They don't really want to do it. But there's so much value in telling their stories, not only for them commercially, but also for others to get those learnings.
You say you needed to refresh. It sounds like an incredibly short period of time. I think between my first business, which blew up spectacularly, and then starting my next business, RFI, was about a 4-year gap before I was ready to go again. So you moved really quickly. But just on that, how important do you think it is? Because you hear this all the time. So many successful founders, it's not their first rodeo. They've had a spectacular failure or a really challenging business that didn't go so well, and they've learned lessons from that, and that's enabled them to be successful the second or third time round. I mean, I think you're on your 4th time now, with some wins along the way. But how important are those? Is it to learn from those failures, and how important are those early lessons when you're starting a business?
It's actually that's such a great point. And yeah, when I reflect on all the founders that I know and entrepreneurs that we've represented, or just people in my network, you're so right. Like, they're not necessarily on business 1. They're on business 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, and they've had ups and downs along the way. I just think you never, as an entrepreneur or a founder, you never are satisfied with what you've built. You always want to keep going. It's never about the money. It's about the build. It's about the journey. And yes, there were times where I never wanted to go back, which I mentioned, but I think it's ingrained. It was definitely ingrained in me. And I just had the good fortune that I was working with Kerry and loving the work that I did, and learning a lot about working in that government space, but also realized that there was something more in me. And I always tell this story that I remember going to her a little bit somewhat scared, and I was like, oh, I love working with you, but I need to start this business. And she very graciously said, you can do whatever you want, but you can't leave me. So for several years after that, that was before, that was pre having my daughter. And I love business, and I spent a lot of time, what we call working, but a lot of time just building this side hustle, and then still running Kerry's business and doing both, which I absolutely loved.
So I want to come back to your daughter and work-life balance in a bit, but when you're building your side hustle, and this is something I talk to all the founders about, how conscious were you that this is the type of brand, the type of culture? How deliberate were you in creating a culture which you've now successfully brought, a really large team into, and how much did it just kind of evolve itself, or were there some really deliberate thoughts in your head about this is the culture I want, and this is what I want people to think of when they're thinking of the PR hub?
Honestly, when I started, so it wasn't called the PR Hub. It was a different name. It was a shelf company that I had because I had no money at this time. So I was like, can't afford to get another PTY Limited. That'll do. But there was no thought process in and around the culture or what it looked like. For me, it was just very much that I was excited and passionate about this. I guess what I saw is as a gap in the market when it came to entrepreneurs and CEOs. And at that time, the word entrepreneur and words like startups was just starting to evolve, and the community was as well in Sydney. And I was just so focused on, this is what I'm passionate about. These people have these amazing stories. And not only are these stories like so interesting, but also it's their unique point of difference. And people resonate with people, not just brand names. And I learned that really early on in my first role. And so it was like, how do I navigate this for these people? I actually am just very passionate about building those stories and helping them understand the connection between that, and then how do they then leverage that to tell people about the amazing businesses that they're working on. So look, I often say founders don't start businesses to become famous. That's something that we have to work with them on in our business, is actually sort of convincing them a lot of the time that it's them that brings the power, them as the spokesperson. And I don't think founders really necessarily start a business thinking about what the culture is going to look like, because they're just so focused on solving a problem that they're really passionate about.
Yeah, that is key, isn't it? Solving a problem. It's like if you're not solving a problem, and you see this so often now, which is kind of leading into my next question on what I guess is called founder tourism. I think it's been called recently that, as you say, the whole idea of being a founder, being an entrepreneur, which was a word that didn't really exist 20, 25 years ago outside Silicon Valley, has become very au fait, very glamorized. People hear the success stories, and now people do start it because they want to become famous or they want to become wealthy, and not necessarily because they've seen a problem that needs solving, that someone's willing to spend money on a solution. So and with that comes a huge amount uh of danger, if you like, because people getting into things without really understanding the mental stress. So you obviously, as you said, you had 80 grand in credit card debt. You were emotionally very, very bruised. And yet 6 months later, you'd managed to, restore yourself completely and ready to go again. So what are some of the things that founders can think about when they're trying to develop that mental resilience that's so important when you're running your own business?
Yeah, look, I definitely was bruised, Charles. I use that word a bit. Look, I think also I just needed to have a break. I just needed to have a bit of space. 6 months maybe doesn't seem like a lot of time, but equally I didn't give up my day job for years later. And so, from that perspective, that did ease me into it. I think it never goes away in terms of the ups and the downs. I will say that. For me, look, I a couple of years ago went down this path of training in Vedic meditation. I think I went into it thinking it was going to solve all my problems, and it didn't. But I certainly found that it is actually it's 20 minutes twice a day. So, and I might miss one or two a week and get a bit cranky at myself, but I think that's okay. For me, that has been really helpful in the past, especially the past 18 months. It doesn't solve all the problems. The work has to happen constantly in other areas. But I do find that it does bring me back to a place where my nervous system gets a chance to reset, even just for those 20 minutes. And I wear an Aura ring, so I can track that as well. Everybody's different. Everyone is different. I think I love the idea that we have a growing amount of people doing podcasts like this one, or talking, doing interviews where they talk about the human side. They talk about the challenges, and that's something that we often encourage in our clients. Again, it's not a sign of weakness or vulnerability. It's a chance to sort of show that, yeah, there's all these great things happening in your life or your business, but equally, like, it's not without the other stuff that goes with it.
Yeah, and what I'm really interested in talking further about. So, one of the listeners to this podcast, who's a female founder from Australia, now in London, I think been bootstrapping for about 2 years, is kind of contacted me and said, can you discuss this? Because they're caught in that classic trap of it's just started working really well, so they literally don't have a minute to themselves. They're working every hour. They're working at weekends. Like, they're at that bit where they're starting to get traction. It's starting to get really, really exciting, and that's absolutely brilliant. But she said her friends and family have all been complaining that they just like have not seen her at all. And she was like, how do you get balance as a founder? Because you've got your passion that's finally starting to work, and that now that it's starting to work, that's the time when you really kind of need to double down and drive it as much as you can. But at the same time, and in your case, make sure your daughter knows who you are, and like, just this person who comes in and out occasionally and sort of waves from a distance. So what are some of the things that founders can do to try and I think I was talking to Angus Stevens on the last show about getting some perspective, getting some balance. Like, what are some of the things that you'd suggest in that kind of space?
Look, it's a good question. I think balance, when it comes to being a founder, work or your business is just part of who you are. So I always don't sort of talk about the work-life balance so much. It's about finding what are the priorities in your life right now, and for me anyway, recognizing that, sort of going personal, family, business, they're the three pillars for me. What am I going to focus on the most for the next, say, 90 days? Because one thing I've realized for me as an individual is that trying to do all those three things well all at once, I fail.
Yeah,
And I used to really beat myself up about this, because I was just like, no, I need to have it all. And in my experience, it doesn't happen like that. And I think definitely when you're in the early stages of building a business, you're just naturally going to probably be more in that business bit than the family bit. And I've spoken to, fellow entrepreneurs and friends who have businesses. And I know even for me, sometimes spending time with my family, or my family understanding why I'm spending so much time in my business, it's challenging because they don't live in that same world. And I think the thing that's worked the most for me to get through that is to find like-minded people. So I'm a member of Entrepreneurs Organization, which is EO, which is a global organization. And that's been phenomenal for me, because that's a chance to be around others who are building businesses, or they've built businesses, but to feel sort of human, to feel sort of normal, because sometimes being around your family or your friends doesn't feel quite normal because they just don't get it. And we don't necessarily get what they're doing. So I think that's really important. Also, I think as you get sort of into that late stage startup or scale up phase, and you've got more people in your team, and you've grown, then you're in a different place where maybe you can spend a bit more time outside of that business. But those early years for me, like, I was working weekends all the time, and I had a daughter. I didn't take a proper maternity leave, which I would never recommend. It took me a long time to gel to actually understand and appreciate the beauty in being a mother and not just a business owner.
Yeah, and that's so interesting what you say about, other people not understanding, and coming back to your comment earlier about, the need to constantly keep going and see where you can take something. Because so often as you start to get a modicum of success and get some traction, friends and family will say, well, it's going really well now. Why can't you step back a bit? Why can't you slow down? Why do you have to go and launch in this country, or launch this product, or do this here? Because it's the same thing that gets you up out of your chair and going to start a business in the first place is that drive that you just can't turn off, which is to try and see exactly how far you can take it. But just coming back to what you're saying, so you didn't take any maternity leave. That must have been really, really challenging as a mum with a young daughter.
I thought I could do it all, Charles. I remember having this conversation with a client, and they we were doing a launch with a government minister for their new offices and premises in Melbourne, and I live in Sydney in Australia. And I was like, it'll be fine. It's a week after I have the baby. I'll be on a plane. I'll be there. Absolute, like, and I think you had Taryn Williams on the show also. And Taryn and I are quite close, and we used to work in the same office back then. And
Okay.
we used to sort of joke about Taryn, be like, well, you're just going to bring her in and put her under the desk, right? Like, you're just going to work and she can sit in the bar. And I was like, yeah, like, we can do that. Absolute, like, just incredibly naive. But until it's like anything in life, I think until that particular thing happens to you, you have no idea. And I was very obsessed with my business. It was early stages. I used to worry, you know, from a female perspective, and I sort of just shake my head now, but I used to be so worried that clients would know that I was taking some time off, because I was just so worried they'd all walk away and I'd lose them all. So it was a lot of like misconceptions around business and learnings I've had even from that experience. And I, like I said, I didn't particularly warm to motherhood. I absolutely love it now. And I say, you know, I sort of shape my work and my life around my daughter now, because they're the years that I'll never get back when she gets older.
Yeah, that's so important. I mean, they're all much older now, but just before I started my last business, just after I started my last business, and had four boys in sort of, well, my wife did, not me, in 5 years. And I remember showing them photos, and that's like, you know, them as like toddlers and stuff, like, you know, playing around on the desk in my office, and, you know, using coloring pens on the wall. And they're like, what were we doing in your office at that age? And I was like, I was exactly like you. I was like, I can do this. I can take you here. I can do this here. I can do this conference call here. I love your 90 days. You know, what's going to be my priority for the next 90 days, just to give yourself that focus and shift it so you can go 90 days on the business, and then I'm going to have 90 days not on the bit, you know, not doing the business, but just prioritizing personal or family. That's really important as well. And yeah, and just talking about that kind of imposter syndrome almost that lots of founders have. There are some founders who are super confident. I tend to find them mainly in the fintech world, but and certainly coming out of the US. But most founders, you have that kind of imposter moment where you do think, oh, you know, I don't want to say I'm late to this presentation because I was dropping my child off at school, or you know, I was doing something other than devoting myself entirely to this business that you're buying into as a client. So do you think that's just a kind of maturity thing as the business grows, or there's some things that you can kind of do from day one to try and make sure you get a better balance between accepting what you can and can't do?
Look, I'm not sure. I don't know if I've got the right answer, but I think when it comes to the 90-day planning, like, I always have the goals for each of those areas, but maybe one is a bit more intense than the others. But I try to keep the balance there because they're all equally important. The one that usually fails the most is the personal one. So I've got really good at like the focus on the family, the daughter, the business, and then the personal one drops off a bit. Look, there's so much out there. I think when I look at LinkedIn in particular at the moment, and there's the entrepreneurs or the founders that have exited business for 9 figures, and they're doing it again. There's that real hustle culture.
Yeah.
And I actually think sometimes that can be a little bit damaging for up and coming entrepreneurs who are so excited about building a business, but then maybe think they constantly have to be 24/7. And finding that balance is really hard, but equally from a mental health perspective, from a family perspective, you know, this idea that, you know, don't sleep, or, you know, get 3 or 4 hours of sleep, like, it's scientifically proven now that that's probably one of the most cheapest, easiest ways to biohack your way to longevity, is actually to make sure you're getting decent sleep.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, that for me personally, I think it comes with age and experience as well. And you get to a certain age and you think, I really do need to prioritize my health, and it's okay to take a holiday. But equally for me, that's a constant battle in my head.
It's interesting what you say about founders who've achieved 8-figure exits. So it's because I remember at the start of this year joining a small group on social media of founders who'd done that, and some of whom who've gone back in. And part of it was, yeah, kind of like, this is what I do, this is the hustle, etc., etc. The other part of it was everybody saying, yeah, everyone just kind of looks at you and goes, great, you've done that, what's next? with the assumption being you're going to do something else, it's going to be bigger, it's going to be better, it's going to be even more. So there's kind of almost just a social pressure of like, as much as you might want to kick back and go, I've achieved quite a lot here, there's this almost social pressure to go again, to show you can do it again, and this time is going to be, even bigger, better, or more wildly successful. But just talking about the founders you represent, obviously the PR Hub, you represent founders, successful entrepreneurs, CEOs. As you look at kind of like your client base, are there kind of like consistent characteristics or behaviors that show you that there are certain things that help make a good and successful founder that you've kind of seen as you've advised them?
Yeah, that's actually a really, really good question, Charles. There's certainly different types of entrepreneurs, which I often talk to my team about, that it's understanding very quickly like what type of client, what type of founder are we working with in each specific business. Look, it sounds pretty simple, but these are exceptional people who just never give up. And you don't particularly see the real lows or hear the real lows, but they get through those and they get up out of bed the next day and they present themselves, particularly into their teams, in a way that they show true leadership. And so a lot can be going on for them behind the scenes. And we know that with founders, like there's so many things that they're juggling, but it's choosing how they present each day and present to their teams, to their stakeholders, their clients, and what they bring to work. So in terms of traits, they just never give up, Charles. They're always thinking, they're always wanting to do something better. You talked about the 8-9-figure exit before, and I've worked with quite a few of those founders over the years. And I'm working with one right now, and it's not about the money anymore. And it probably never was really about the money, the true success. It's just that drive to actually build and grow something successful.
Yeah, it's interesting. The one thing that everybody I've interviewed on this show has said, and like yourself, they're all successful founders. The one thing that holds them in common, other than determination and obviously drive and everything, is they all say, I wanted to do something or build something that I was proud of. I wanted to do work that I could point to and be proud of. That was the number one goal. I mean, obviously they've always had the benefit of success, and there's financial rewards for that. But that was never the starting goal. It was to do something that I could be proud of, and I could point to and say, that's something that I've helped create, or I've led the creation of. And it's so interesting what you say about leadership, because you can't go in the morning as a founder and CEO and just let everyone know everything that's going on and you're juggling with, because everyone will probably go, this sounds awful, I'm out of here. You kind of have to go in with your smile on your face and your positive mental attitude, and ready to go again, and get your team all fired up and ready to follow you on your latest crazy venture. But just coming back to those personal stories, how important, two kind of questions really, how important is that personal brand and narrative now, because for founders, because as you say, most founders, it's the last thing on their mind, they're busy solving a problem. So how important is that? And then what are some of the ways, especially given the array of social media available now, what are some of the ways that as founders start to get enough space to start thinking about their personal brand and narrative, that you would recommend they can start getting that kind of like story out there?
So I think we're definitely seeing a shift away from it seeming like it's showy, or it's something that people only do if they want to be famous. I joke when people ask me, what do you do? And I say, well, I make founders and CEOs famous. That gets their attention, but it's not why they come to work with us. As I said at the beginning, like founders don't start businesses big. They haven't traditionally started a business because they're thinking about how many times they're going to appear in the media. It's far from that. But when I was 19 and I was at university, I had a job with a company which was called NADS back then. It's now called Suez Mail and Daughters. And that was my grounding in watching a migrant entrepreneur, a female entrepreneur, create a product in her kitchen, which then became a global household brand name. And I think the revenue back then was 60 million. That's 20 years ago, 60 million turnover. And that to me cemented this idea of the power of an authentic narrative for a founder in actually helping grow a business and achieve commercial success. Very simple. And I often refer to that because that's how we work with our clients now. It's about not about making them famous for the sake of it, but it's like, how do we extract your learnings, your experiences, why you started this business, your unique personality? How do we then spread that to then let people know about your business and make you stand out from your competitors? So there's a huge opportunity in that. And you know, you interview these people on your podcast and we see them popping up more and more all the time. But I'm so passionate about helping founders unlock the power of their stories and understand that it's okay to actually be out there in the media telling these stories, because it's not only helping them from a commercial perspective, but it's also helping them achieve what they set out to do, which was to solve a problem.
And I think it's so important these days, particularly with the advent of AI. So many problems now are being and will be in the future solved by AI or AI-based solutions. And I think that that personal story, that that human element that founders can bring is such a key point of differentiation. And I think as humans, we buy into those human stories. We've sat around campfires for hundreds of thousands of years, listening to each other tell stories. I think those stories are so important. But obviously, by the time a founder is a client of the PR Hub, they've obviously they've got a certain amount of success and traction. What are when you're first starting out, particularly when you're bootstrapping, and you have no funds and uh, very little time to think about it. What are some of the kind of basic things you can do so that as say 3 or 4 years down the line, as the journey grows and continues, and they can start to approach you or businesses like you for help, they've done some things that were smart to set themselves up well on the road to success for telling that personal narrative, as opposed to you're looking at them 3 years into their journey going, well, you really shouldn't have done this and this, but we'll try and overcome that now. So what are some of the things that they can kind of do from the very get-go that kind of just helps them?
I think to start with, the founders, there's nothing wrong with not worrying too much about PR. It's very much about worrying about getting your business to a stage where actually it's commercially viable. You've built a team and you actually can free up your space to then think about, what does it look like to be a spokesperson for this business? What are my areas of expertise? So as somebody starting out, you've got so many opportunities with social media, owning channels like LinkedIn, appearing on podcasts, writing your own blogs, jumping on TikTok if that's your thing, using all these platforms that are essentially free, but sitting down thinking about, what am I an expert at? And I actually do think, if you're not engaging someone and paying them, but to find somebody that you really trust. Find someone who's trustworthy, who's quite objective to you. So probably not family or friends, but look, it could be, but it's somebody who can sit down with you and maybe interview you and go, okay, what are the 3 things you're most passionate about or you've got experience in? Let's uncover a little bit of your story, your personal journey. And then, as you said, AI is everywhere. And if we use AI well, I'm a big believer in using AI to help shape and refine things, not necessarily write things from scratch, because then it's going to be terrible. But if you can actually think about, as if you were briefing somebody else, like a writer, if you were to sit down and give them all the key points about your life, and again, I say work with someone you trust, because I know personally it's so hard to sit down and write about myself. It's so hard. I've tried so many times. I can do it for countless people, countless founders and CEOs. But if I try to do it for myself, I blank. I can't think about anything that's interesting in my story. So sit down and just be comfortable with that process. And then maybe you can use AI to help shape you a bio for LinkedIn, or help you take all the things that you've given it and say, as an independent observer, what do you think are my 3 areas of expertise? Because then you probably get to a place where it gives you some things that you're comfortable with, and then you can just naturally start to build that story. But I think PR should never be forced, and not every founder and not every business needs PR all the time.
Yeah, and not every founder is entirely comfortable being in the spotlight and telling that story. Some are more comfortable after a period of time than others. So I don't think anyone's genuinely comfortable the first time they do live TV or an interview with a magazine or something. But just coming back to what we were talking about at the beginning. So As I think I said, this is your fourth business now. You dropped out of university to start to work on your first one. You've had some highs, some lows. You've obviously done what every successful founder has done, and dug really deep, and arrived in the morning with a smile on your face, ready to go yet again without anyone knowing all the plates you're spinning in the background, desperately trying to stay on top of everything. What are some of the other than the meditation and the 90 days, what are there any kind of like, plans? So when I was talking to Angus Stevens, he had like a how not to die plan. So when you have that existential crisis, he had a plan to, I had something similar at RFI that didn't have such a cool name as not how not to die. But yeah, but do you have any kind of like, okay, when this happens, and it's going to happen, this is my go-to process that I need to start going through to make sure that the business survives?
Oh, that's a really good question. Just back to, so I did drop a degree. I didn't drop out of uni.
Awesome.
That's all right. I was doing business law, and to this day, I still regret not finishing my law degree. But I did start my first business at 23 and borrowed a ton of money from the bank to do it. Look, I don't know that I necessarily have anything that's super concrete in that space. I have my group of mentors. One thing that I didn't have very early on, which I think really impacted my journey, was not having trustworthy mentors,
Okay.
not having people that I can go to with, it could be something very simple or something much bigger. And now I'm very fortunate to have some amazing people, both formal and informal, in my life that I do go to if the shit hits the fan. And I think that's extremely important, to have those places where you feel safe and you can be vulnerable and you can share and know that it's not going to go anywhere. So for me, that's probably the go-to, rather than any sort of strict sort of process or plan.
Okay, so obviously having really good mentors, and I agree wholeheartedly, and don't be afraid to change mentors. I think Elon Musk, who, love him or loathe him, obviously, one of the richest and possibly one of the most successful entrepreneurs of all time, has an average of 5 mentors at any one time that he constantly revolves through and changes. So I think making sure that you're not afraid to ask for help and finding some really good mentors that are appropriate for what you're going through at that time is really important. But if you were, I mean, lots of people listening to this are not necessarily already on the founder journey. They're kind of sitting there, probably quite nervously on the fence, thinking about do I make the jump, or they've just made the jump. So if you could go back and talk to yourself at the start of your career, and sort of give some really, really great advice, that like most of us years ago, we probably wouldn't have listened to ourselves 20 years ago. But if you could do that, what advice would you be giving to anyone starting off on the founder journey at this point?
I would be making sure I really test my product, not just think that I've got a great idea and everyone's going to love it, or my grandma loves it, or my mum loves it, or my 5 friends told me that this is a cool idea, go and start a business. Because starting a business is hard work. I'm not going to swear. It's hard work and it's persistence. And once you start, there's no going back, or you're going to run out of cash. So I think it's getting past this like nice to have, I want to be an entrepreneur. I think there's so much more freedom in owning my own business than working for somebody else. It certainly has its upsides, but there's so many other things to explore. So I think I've seen a lot of people go and start a business without really doing any product market testing, like fitting, like, as I said, go wide, and also like don't spend a lot of money testing, because you're going to run out of cash really, really fast.
Yeah, that's absolutely fantastic advice. Make sure people want your product and it's necessary, not just something that your friends and family say, oh, that sounds like a really good idea. And the amount of products you see where it's stuck in product development for eternity, while it's constantly being tinkered with without anybody speaking to the market, of someone going, well, I think this and I think this. You need to get that market buyer feedback to really understand what the product's going to be. We're pretty much out of time. Sam, thank you very much for talking to us and sharing all the highs and lows, and particularly being so open about like the mental stresses and how to get that balance of personal and family and business, so that you don't try and do it all, and you do kind of retain your sanity at the end of it. But thank you very much for joining us, and look forward to talking to you again soon.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thanks for having me, Charles.
Great, thanks very much. For all our listeners, if you'd like to hear more podcasts on how to bootstrap, or if you want to access all our bootstrapping resources and playbooks, then just go to our website www.bootstrapconfidential.com for free registration.